Beloved, hear me by the Spirit of the living God. Suffering has ruled too many minds, not because it is powerful, but because it has been permitted to sit upon the throne of your awareness. I tell you today, suffering is not your master. Consciousness under God is. When light enters a room, darkness does not argue, it disappears. And in the same way, when divine awareness rises in a man or woman, suffering has no choice but to bow and flee. Suffering exists only where consciousness is unguarded, not because suffering is strong, but because the gate of the inner man has been left open. God never designed the human soul to be a dwelling place for torment, fear, or despair. These things do not enter by force, they enter by permission. The greatest battlefield is not the body, not the world, not circumstances, but awareness itself. Whatever the mind continually entertains is given authority to remain. That is why two people can face the same storm, yet one collapses while the other stands unmoved, for consciousness determines what rules the heart. The unguarded mind becomes a field where every wandering thought takes root. Fear whispers, pain speaks loudly, memories repeat themselves, and before long suffering feels permanent. But permanence is an illusion created by repetition. The soul that does not watch what it allows to live within will eventually call bondage normal. This is how suffering hides, by familiarity. The enemy does not need new weapons when he can convince a person to constantly observe pain, rehearse weakness, and meditate on loss. Awareness that is not governed will always drift toward what is loudest, and suffering is loud to the natural senses. Divine truth does not operate by emotion, it operates by consciousness. When awareness is fixed on what God has spoken, suffering cannot maintain its position. It may knock, it may shout, it may attempt to intimidate, but it cannot rule where it is not recognized as an authority. Many cry out asking God to remove suffering, not realizing that heaven has already given them the power to close the door. Consciousness is that door. What you continually acknowledge becomes your experience, whether holy or destructive. An unguarded consciousness magnifies symptoms, elevates feelings, and turns temporary discomfort into identity. People begin to say, "This is just who I am," not knowing that they are confessing allegiance to suffering. Yet the moment awareness shifts from what is felt to what is true, something happens in the unseen. The inner man rises, faith awakens, strength that was always present begins to surface. Suffering thrives on attention, but faith thrives on focus. What you look at the longest grows the strongest. God never asked his people to deny reality. He called them to govern it. Consciousness trained by truth does not argue with pain. It overrules it. The soul that learns to stand watch does not wait for feelings to change before believing. It understands that belief changes feeling, not the other way around. When awareness is surrendered to the spirit, even the body must listen. The mind stops wandering, the heart stops trembling. Peace enters not because circumstances changed, but because authority returned to its rightful place. Most suffering continues because people observe it more than they observe God. They wake thinking about it, speak about it, expect it, and unknowingly give it a throne. But consciousness was never meant to be passive. It was designed to be ruled by truth. The moment awareness is taken captive by faith, suffering begins to lose oxygen. Fear starves, anxiety weakens, pain no longer has a narrative to feed upon. The soul becomes still, not by effort, but by alignment. Guarding consciousness is not suppression. It is discipline. It is choosing what deserves your attention and refusing what does not. Just as a city without walls invites invasion, a mind without spiritual boundaries invites torment. Yet the believer is not helpless. The Spirit gives discernment to recognize what thoughts are permitted and what must be rejected. The moment awareness learns to say no, suffering discovers it is no longer welcome. This is why awakening consciousness is more powerful than pleading for relief. Relief comes and goes, but awareness transformed creates dominion. When consciousness is trained to dwell on truth, suffering has nowhere to land. It may attempt to revisit, but it finds no agreement. It finds no fear to partner with. It finds no unguarded space to occupy. The inner man stands alert, alive, and anchored, knowing that whatever is not authorized by truth has no legal right to remain. An awareness fixed on God becomes a fire that consumes every light. Before it can take form, awareness determines authority in the inner man, because whatever you are conscious of ruling within, you will inevitably govern how you live. Authority is not decided by circumstances, symptoms, or history, but by what the soul acknowledges as true. The inner man was created to be led, not by emotion, but by awareness aligned with God. When awareness is passive, authority slips away. When awareness is intentional, authority rises and takes its rightful place. Many live beneath burdens not because they lack faith, but because their awareness has been trained to respond instead of command. They react to pain, respond to fear, and follow the signals of the body without questioning who is in charge. Awareness that reacts becomes a servant to sensation. Awareness that observes becomes a ruler. The moment a person recognizes that they can choose where attention rests, the inner man begins to awaken to authority that was always present but unused. The inner man does not gain authority through effort, but through recognition. Authority is established the moment awareness agrees with truth. This is why two people can hear the same promise, yet only one walks in power. One hears it as information, the other receives it as reality. Awareness is the dividing line. When consciousness accepts truth as final, the soul shifts position from being ruled to ruling. Nothing external needs to change for authority to be established internally. Suffering persists where awareness consistently bows to sensation. Pain demands attention, o solo mudu sua composisao, and the untrained mind gives both freely. But awareness was never designed to be enslaved to what is felt. It was designed to be anchored in what is eternal. The inner man grows strong not by ignoring pain, but by refusing to let pain define truth. When awareness refuses to crown discomfort as king, authority quietly changes hands. Authority in the inner man is revealed through stillness. The soul that knows who rules does not panic. It does not rush to explain, justify, or defend suffering. It stands. Awareness that stands creates order. Thoughts begin to align, emotions settle, even the body responds to the calm command of an awakened inner life. Authority does not shout, it establishes presence. When awareness becomes steady, chaos loses momentum. Many mistake authority for intensity, but true authority is clarity. It is the clear knowing that truth outranks feeling. The inner man does not need permission from circumstances to rule. Awareness aligned with God operates from a higher law. Just as gravity submits to greater forces, suffering submits to consciousness grounded in truth. The inner man does not fight to prove authority. It exercises it naturally by where awareness rests. The greatest transfer of power occurs when awareness moves from the outer world to the inner witness. As long as attention is scattered among symptoms, opinions, and fears, authority remains diluted. But when awareness turns inward and aligns with divine truth, something shifts. The soul stops asking what will happen and begins declaring what is. Authority is born the moment awareness agrees with heaven rather than the senses. Inner authority also requires consistency. Awareness that wavers hands authority back and forth. One moment faith rules, the next moment fear takes over. But the soul that learns to remain fixed builds stability. Authority becomes established, not through dramatic moments, but through continual alignment. Each time awareness chooses truth over reaction, the inner man grows more secure in its position. When awareness governs the inner man, suffering loses its voice. It may attempt to speak, but it is no longer listened to. The soul becomes selective. Thoughts are weighed. Emotions are examined. Nothing is allowed to reign simply because it appears. Authority flows from discernment. Awareness trained by truth becomes a filter through which only what aligns with God is permitted to pass. This is why transformation begins in awareness before it manifests anywhere else. Authority is an inside reality long before it is seen outwardly. The inner man rises the moment awareness stops asking for permission to rule. Fear does not need to be defeated, it needs to be dethroned. Pain does not need to be negotiated with, it needs to be outranked. Awareness that knows where authority belongs does not struggle for control. Because it already stands in it, what you hold in consciousness becomes law. Because awareness is not passive observation, but active agreement. The inner world responds not to what is desired occasionally, but to what is consistently acknowledged as true. Consciousness is the courtroom where verdicts are issued, and life follows those verdicts without protest. Whatever is allowed to remain in awareness long enough gains authority to operate, not because it is right, but because it has been legalized by attention. Many believe life is governed by external forces, yet the unseen laws of consciousness quietly direct outcomes. A thought repeated becomes an expectation sustained becomes belief, a belief unchallenged becomes experience. This progression happens daily, unnoticed, shaping reality from the inside out. The law of consciousness does not discriminate between truth and error. It enforces whatever it is given. That is why suffering often persists, even when truth is known intellectually but not held consciously. Holding something in consciousness is more than thinking about it. It is agreeing with it at the core of awareness. A person may speak faith yet inwardly expect loss, pain, or failure. In such cases, consciousness enforces the deeper agreement rather than the spoken confession. Words carry power only when they echo what awareness has already accepted. This is why transformation requires more than declarations. It requires a shift in what the soul silently recognizes as normal. The law of consciousness operates continuously. It does not pause for prayer or wait for understanding. It simply responds to what is present. Fear entertained becomes fear established. Peace embraced becomes peace enforced. The inner man lives under the jurisdiction of whatever occupies awareness most consistently. This is not punishment or reward. It is alignment. Life moves in the direction consciousness has authorized. Suffering becomes law when pain is continually observed, anticipated, and identified with. Awareness begins to consult suffering before making decisions. Thoughts are filtered through it. Emotions revolve around it. The inner world organizes itself around the expectation of discomfort. Once this happens, suffering no longer feels like an intruder. It feels like a resident. Law has been established not by truth but by repetition. Breaking the law of suffering does not require force, it requires replacement. Consciousness cannot be emptied, only filled. When truth enters awareness and is held there, the old law begins to lose jurisdiction. Just as a new government renders old decrees invalid, a new awareness nullifies former agreements. This shift is often quiet but decisive. The inner man senses the change before the outer world reflects it. Faith functions as a higher law because it aligns consciousness with divine reality. When awareness holds truth as final, even if feelings disagree, a new order is established. The body, emotions, and circumstances eventually conform because they are not the lawmakers. Consciousness is. The soul that understands this stops waiting for external proof before changing inner alignment. It chooses truth first and allows reality to follow. Many struggle because they attempt to fight experiences while continuing to hold the same awareness that created them. They resist pain yet rehearse it mentally. They desire peace yet expect chaos. Consciousness cannot enforce conflicting laws. It follows the dominant agreement. This is why sustained awareness is more powerful than emotional moments. A single revelation held consistently outweighs years of inconsistent belief. Holding truth in consciousness requires discipline, not strain. It is the steady return of awareness to what is known rather than what is felt. Each time the mind drifts toward fear and is gently brought back to truth, the law strengthens. Over time, the inner world reorganizes, reactions soften, expectations change, the soul begins to anticipate good rather than brace for harm. The law of consciousness explains why suffering often ends suddenly when awareness finally shifts. Nothing external may have changed, yet the experience does. The verdict has been reversed. What once had authority no longer does. Consciousness has withdrawn its agreement. Without legal standing, suffering cannot remain. This law also explains why spiritual growth accelerates when awareness is guarded. Thoughts are not allowed to linger unexamined. Emotions are acknowledged but not obeyed. Attention is treated as sacred territory. Whatever is permitted, there is understood to have creative power. The soul becomes intentional, recognizing that every moment of awareness is a moment of legislation, and what is held within consciousness today becomes the reality enforced tomorrow. Faith is consciousness aligned with divine truth, not a feeling that rises and falls with circumstances, but a settled awareness that governs the inner man. Many confuse faith with emotion, expecting to feel powerful before they believe, yet true faith operates long before emotion agrees. Faith is the quiet certainty that truth remains true regardless of sensation. When consciousness is aligned with what God has spoken, the soul stands on an unmovable foundation. Divine truth does not change to accommodate experience. Experience changes when consciousness aligns with divine truth. Faith does not negotiate with fear or seek permission from pain. It recognizes a higher reality and abides there. The inner man becomes strong not by denying struggle, but by refusing to let struggle define what is real. Faith establishes a reference point that remains steady while everything else shifts around it. When consciousness is not aligned with truth, it searches for reassurance in the outer world. It looks to symptoms, opinions, and circumstances for confirmation. Faith reverses this order. Consciousness aligned with divine truth looks inward first, anchoring itself in what God has declared. From that position, it interprets everything else. This alignment does not ignore reality. It interprets reality through a higher lens. Faith is not blind optimism. It is informed awareness. It sees clearly what exists, but refuses to be governed by it. The inner man trained in faith understands that feelings are indicators, not authorities. Pain may speak, but truth has the final word. When consciousness remains aligned with truth, the soul stops oscillating between hope and despair. Stability replaces uncertainty because awareness has found its anchor. Alignment requires attention. Consciousness drifts naturally toward what is loudest, and fear is often louder than truth. Faith is the discipline of returning awareness to what God has said again and again. This repetition is not vain, it is formative. Each return strengthens alignment. Over time, consciousness begins to default to truth rather than react to sensation. The power of faith lies in agreement. Heaven releases truth, but consciousness must receive it as reality. Without agreement, truth remains external. When awareness aligns, truth becomes internal law. This is why faith is described as substance rather than concept. It occupies space within the inner man. It gives form to what was unseen. Consciousness aligned with truth becomes a vessel through which divine reality expresses itself. Many struggle because they attempt to use faith as a tool instead of living from alignment. They try to apply belief temporarily to fix a problem, then return to old awareness patterns. Faith cannot function in fragments. Alignment must be continuous to be effective. The inner man grows strong, not through bursts of belief, but through sustained orientation toward truth. Faith also brings rest. When consciousness is aligned, striving ceases. The soul no longer tries to force outcomes or manipulate circumstances. It knows that alignment precedes manifestation. This rest is not passivity, it is confidence. Awareness settled in truth allows action to flow without anxiety. Decisions become clearer, responses become measured, the inner world reflects order. Alignment with divine truth exposes false agreements. As faith grows, awareness becomes more discerning. Thoughts that once seemed normal are recognized as misaligned. Fear-based expectations lose credibility. Old narratives lose influence. Consciousness begins to reject what contradicts truth, not aggressively, but firmly. The inner man learns to say no without struggle. Faith alignment also affects perception. What once appeared threatening now appears temporary. What once felt overwhelming now feels manageable. Consciousness aligned with truth does not magnify problems, it magnifies God. This shift changes emotional responses without forcing them. Peace emerges naturally when awareness is no longer divided. The greatest strength of faith is its consistency. Emotions fluctuate, but alignment remains. Circumstances change, but truth does not. Consciousness that stays aligned becomes resilient. It absorbs pressure without breaking. It faces uncertainty without losing balance. Faith does not remove challenges immediately, but it removes their power to dominate awareness. This alignment is cultivated daily through attention, choice, and agreement. Every moment offers a decision about where consciousness will rest. Each choice either strengthens alignment or weakens it. Over time, faith becomes the default posture of awareness. The inner man no longer struggles to believe. Belief becomes its natural state. Consciousness aligned with divine truth becomes the atmosphere in which the soul lives and moves, and everything that enters that atmosphere is required to respond to the reality it carries. Pain loses power when awareness is seized by the spirit, because pain does not rule by force but by attention. The body may send signals, the mind may interpret them, but authority is established only when awareness submits. Pain becomes dominant when it is continually observed, anticipated, and feared. Yet when awareness is lifted from the surface level of sensation and anchored in the spirit, pain is no longer the governing voice. The spirit does not eliminate sensation, it reorders authority. Awareness seized by the spirit does not deny the presence of pain, but it refuses to let pain define reality. The inner man learns to distinguish between what is felt and what is final. When this distinction becomes clear, pain begins to lose its grip. It may speak, but it no longer commands attention. Pain feeds on anticipation. The mind imagines continuation, increase, and permanence. Awareness that remains in the natural realm rehearses these possibilities and unknowingly strengthens them. But when awareness is drawn into the spirit, time collapses. Fear of what comes next loses relevance. Consciousness becomes present, steady, and anchored. In this state, pain cannot project itself into the future, and without a future, its power diminishes. The spirit-centered awareness brings perspective. What once felt overwhelming becomes contained. Pain is no longer viewed as an identity or destiny, but as a temporary condition. The inner man stands apart from sensation, observing without absorbing. This separation weakens pain's authority because identification is broken. What you no longer identify with can no longer govern you. When awareness is seized by the spirit, the nervous system responds. Calm replaces agitation. The body senses safety. Tension releases. This is not imagination. It is alignment. The body follows the lead of consciousness. When the inner man rests in spiritual awareness, the outer man begins to follow. Pain thrives in chaos, but it weakens in peace. Spiritual awareness also changes how pain is interpreted. Instead of being a threat, it becomes information. Instead of being feared, it is observed. This shift alone reduces suffering. Fear amplifies pain. Calm diminishes it. Awareness seized by the spirit produces calm not through effort, but through presence. The soul becomes still, and in stillness, pain loses momentum. Many attempt to fight pain mentally, exhausting themselves in resistance. But resistance keeps attention fixed on what is resisted. Awareness seized by the spirit does not fight pain, it transcends it. Attention moves to a higher place where pain cannot follow. In this higher awareness, the inner man experiences peace even if the body has not yet fully adjusted. The spirit draws awareness inward, away from constant monitoring of sensation. The soul stops checking, measuring, and evaluating pain. This withdrawal of attention starves pain of its fuel. Over time, the body responds to this change. Muscles relax, breathing deepens, healing processes activate naturally when stress diminishes. Awareness seized by the spirit also restores trust. Fear and pain thrive where trust is absent. When consciousness rests in the spirit, trust becomes natural. The soul knows it is held, guided, and protected. This knowing reduces the vigilance that keeps pain alive. The body no longer feels the need to signal danger constantly. The power of spiritual awareness lies in surrender, not control. Awareness does not seize the spirit seizes awareness. This shift releases effort. The soul stops trying to manage pain and allows peace to govern instead. In this state, even intense sensations lose their emotional charge. Pain may exist, but suffering diminishes. As awareness remains in the spirit, the inner man grows sensitive to peace rather than pain. Attention gravitates towards stillness, truth, and presence. Pain becomes background noise rather than the main focus. The soul regains its sense of wholeness. Identity shifts from being a sufferer to being an observer rooted in peace. This is why spiritual awareness is transformative. It does not always remove pain instantly, but it removes its dominance. The inner man stands free, even when the body is still adjusting. Awareness seized by the spirit reclaims authority over attention, and whatever no longer holds attention, no longer holds power. Awakened consciousness forces suffering to depart because suffering survives only where awareness is asleep. It does not need strength when it can rely on ignorance. The moment consciousness awakens, suffering is exposed, and exposure removes authority. Light does not argue with darkness, it displaces it. In the same way, awakened awareness does not wrestle with suffering, it renders it unnecessary. Suffering depends on unconscious agreement, and awakening dissolves that agreement instantly. An unawakened consciousness lives on autopilot. Thoughts repeat themselves, emotions cycle without question, and reactions become habits. In this state, suffering feels inevitable, even personal. The soul believes pain is something happening to it rather than something passing through it, but awakening interrupts this pattern. Awareness steps back and observes. The inner man realizes, I am not my thoughts, I am not my pain, I am not my fear. That realization alone begins to loosen suffering's grip. Suffering requires identification to remain. It stays powerful only as long as awareness says, this is me. Awakened consciousness withdraws that identity. Pain may still be present, but it is no longer personal. Fear may still appear, but it is no longer believed. The inner man no longer merges with sensation or emotion. Separation occurs, and with separation comes freedom. What is observed loses its power to dominate. Awakening also restores choice. When consciousness is asleep, reactions feel automatic. Pain appears and the body tenses. Fear arises and the mind spirals. But when awareness awakens, there is space between stimulus and response. In that space, authority is exercised. The inner man chooses where attention rests. Attention is no longer dragged by discomfort. It is directed by truth. This redirection is subtle but decisive. An awakened consciousness recognizes patterns that once went unnoticed. It sees how suffering feeds on repetition, how fear rehearses itself, how the mind returns to familiar pain because it feels known. Awareness interrupts this cycle. It no longer follows every thought to its conclusion. It no longer entertains every sensation as a threat. This interruption weakens suffering because suffering depends on continuity. Awakening also brings presence. Much suffering exists in memory and imagination rather than in the present moment. The body hurts now, but the mind adds yesterday and tomorrow. Awareness awakened to the present strips suffering of its extensions. Pain is reduced to what it actually is, not what it predicts. Fear loses its stories. Anxiety loses its timelines. Consciousness anchored in the now becomes difficult territory for suffering to occupy. When consciousness awakens, truth becomes experiential rather than conceptual. The soul no longer believes truth as an idea, it recognizes it as reality. This recognition changes everything. Truth is no longer something to reach for, it is something to stand in. From this position, suffering appears less convincing. Its arguments sound hollow. Its threats feel exaggerated. Authority shifts quietly but firmly. Awakened consciousness also alters the nervous system. Awareness that is clear and present sends signals of safety. The body responds by releasing tension. Breath deepens, muscles soften, stress hormones decrease. Healing mechanisms are no longer suppressed by constant alarm. Suffering weakens when the body is no longer locked in survival mode. This is not forced relaxation, but natural response to clarity. Spiritual awakening deepens this effect. Awareness aligned with the spirit carries a quality of peace that suffering cannot imitate. This peace does not depend on comfort or resolution. It exists independently. When consciousness rests in this peace, suffering finds no resonance. It cannot echo, it cannot amplify, it becomes isolated, unable to spread through the inner world. Awakened consciousness also refuses false urgency. Suffering demands immediate attention, immediate reaction, immediate concern. Awareness that is awake does not rush. It sees urgency as a tactic, not a truth. By slowing down, consciousness regains control. Slowness weakens suffering because suffering thrives on panic and haste. Calm observation drains its energy. As awakening stabilizes, the inner man becomes less interested in suffering. Attention naturally gravitates toward clarity, presence, and peace. Suffering becomes boring rather than frightening. What no longer captures interest loses influence. The soul stops feeding pain with focus. Without focus, suffering begins to fade, not dramatically, but steadily as awareness remains awake, alert and grounded in what is real rather than what merely appears.